Hello and welcome to tutorial 213. I was asked a question about drawing lines such as you can see here from a pivot from the high of the wick to the low of the wick and then extending those lines to the end of the chart. And what I've got here is a low pivot with a strength of 5 as you can see, and then also a high pivot with a strength of 5, and in both cases the lines are being drawn to the right of the chart. To do this, we're going to be using trend lines, and we can go to the program, and the first thing we need to do is create the trend line. So I'm doing that in a one statement, and the syntax for that is as follows: trendline.create, and then a bn point and another bn point. You can see they're just dummy values at this point. If you're not familiar with that syntax, a couple of things you can do. You can either type in trend line into an easy language program, then right click and go to definition of trend line, and you'll see various examples of creating a trend line, and this one is probably the easiest. What you can also do is go to the toolbox and double click on the trend line. That will then give you the properties here, which you can change as you wish. So you might say, well, I want it to extend to the right, I want it to be a weight of 5, and I want the color to be a certain color, and I'm going to change the name of it to TL, and so on. You could make all those changes. Then, having done that, you can go to view and designer generated code. You could then copy the syntax into your program, and then finally you would need to delete the item that you got from the toolbox, like so. You could also, of course, just use code similar to what I've got in this program. Incidentally, when creating it, we also need to make sure that in the variables that we have the trend line with the specific name we're using in the variables. Anyway, so having created the trend line here, we can then set some of its properties, and in our case we want it to extend to the right. We want to set a specific color, we want a weight, and then we want to add it to the chart using drawingObjects.add. Okay, so having created the trend line initially, and in fact we've created actually two trend lines. We've created the TL1, which we're going to use for one of those things for the lower pivot, and then trend line 2. We then look at the syntax to tell us when we have a pivot. So we're using the standard pivot function. If you right click on that, you can see the syntax and how you might use it. We're looking for a strength of 5. So we're saying when that is equal to 1 and bar status equals 2. And it's a low pivot, so we set the HiLo as -1. When that occurs, we need to do two things. One is plot on the chart. This is a show me study. We're plotting 5 bars ago, and we're plotting the low of 5 bars ago. Having then done that, we need to set the start point and the end point for TL1 and for TL2. So to set the start point for TL1, we say a new bn point, and then we're putting in that the current bar plus max bars back -6. That gets us to the bar that is the bar that we need, and then we're plotting that at the value of the low 5 bars ago. Again, to set the end point, we're setting the same value, because what we're doing is extending it to the right, and then we do a very similar thing for the other point. Now the bottom of the wick is easy to find, that's just the low, but the top of the wick, that could actually be the open or the close. So we need a little bit of syntax to work out which is which. I do that here. So body low, we're saying the min list of the open 5 bars ago or the close 5 bars ago. That becomes the body low. And then we use that value in the start point. And then of course that is extended to the right. So that is how we do the lines for the wick of the low pivot. Very similar for the high pivot, and the code is here. You can see we're creating the values. I've called them TL3, TL4, and then we're just, when a high pivot occurs, the pivot function is pretty similar apart from the high-low is set to 1. Then we're setting the start points here, TL3 set start point and TL4 set start point and end point. Okay, so that is a quick run through of that. What you might also like to do, however, is add a text string saying the value of the pivot. Let's just go back to the one statement. I've done that. I've created a label saying text label.create. Again, right click on that, see syntax. Initially I put it in a dummy position, but then, and added it to the chart. But then later on, when we do find a pivot, what I've done is set the point value, that sort of positions it, and I've also set the string, which is num string L 5 bars ago, and I've done it to 5 decimal places. Done something similar for the high pivot as well. You can see those on the chart. In fact, the high pivot is shown in white, so we can't see that at the moment. But what I thought we could do is also demonstrate how we could use rectangles to fill in the gap between the two lines. So we can do that going back to the one statement. We can create a rectangle. Again, this syntax can be found by using the toolbox, then going down to rectangle, and then copying the code from the designer generated code. Not going to do that again, but you can see we've created 2 rectangles, and again just put in dummy values here because we're going to change those later. And then going down to when a pivot occurs, we can then set the start and the end points of the rectangles. So I actually commented that code out. I'm just going to uncomment it. We should see those rectangles appearing. Oops. Okay. So now we can see the rectangles between the two lines, and we can see the value here. Now, the only problem with this is that actually the code starts to get a little bit messy, because if we just keep on reusing the code to recreate new trend lines, you'll see that we soon get a very full amount of code. So what we could do is create a method. So what I've done is done that, and I'll just demonstrate that. So I'm just going to comment out some of this and then uncomment some other parts of the program. Okay, so what I've done is created a little method that draws a trend line. So the method's going to return a trend line, and I've called it drawTL, and it's got 4 inputs. It's got the BN point that we start, BN point that we end, which I've called BNPT1 and BNPT2. We've got a color and we've got a weight, and we've got one variable, TL, and simply all we're doing is saying TL equals trendline create, putting in those BN point values. We're extending it to the right, and then we're setting the color according to the inputs and the weight according to the inputs. Then we're returning it. And by doing that, we can now have a slightly simplified one statement, because we can create the trend line using this drawTL as you can see. Then we can add it to the chart. Similarly, we can create TL2 using the same method, and also TL3 and TL4. It just takes up less space, and it's probably easier to read. And what I've done is just change the colors slightly so you can see them on the chart. But the end result is exactly the same. And of course, you could also create a method to draw the rectangles or to draw the text, or in fact to do all of it at the same time. Anyway, hopefully that might be useful. Thank you very much.